This is required reading. This is a really great write-up from Johnny Cullen over at GameDaily.biz, and this is old news. This happened yesterday, and we didn't get a chance to really cover it on PvA Radio, so I want to talk about it here. But yeah, this is a long read, so I definitely recommend you guys finding this article. You can do so if you're hanging out in the chat. You can type !show notes, and it'll give you a link to the Google Drive, to the Google Doc that I use. And if you're watching on YouTube, we put the link to that doc in the description below. So, and that links out to every single article that we use. We're not going to read this whole thing word for word. I'm just going to kind of give you like a high level rundown of what it covers, and then we'll kind of talk about it from there. So a couple days ago, Shawn Layden, it was announced that Shawn Layden was leaving Sony, and it was odd. And I think I saw a tweet from Greg Miller that I think really illustrated how odd it is, because the only real word that Sony gave was this tweet that read, quote, "It is with..." Sorry, something like crazy loud just went by my window. Let me shut my window here. Getting a little freaked out. It's the spooky time of month. Don't want anyone looking in on me. All right. Anyway, here's the tweet from the official PlayStation account. Quote, "It is with great emotion that we announce that Worldwide Studios chairman Shawn Layden will be departing SIE. His visionary leadership will be greatly missed. We wish him success in future endeavors and are deeply grateful for his years of service. Thanks for everything, Shawn." A really, 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 really weird tweet to be like, "It is with great emotion," not great sadness, not, they don't define the emotion that they're experiencing. They just say, "We have a great emotion, and we are going to announce that Shawn Layden is leaving." And look, Shawn Layden isn't somebody who came in, gave 2 years of his life to Sony, and is moving on to something else. Shawn Layden has worked there for 30 years. He is a 30-year veteran of Sony, and the Greg Miller tweet really illustrated that Sony loves press releases, and this is not the only kind of executive level, kind of C-suite level shakeup that we've seen from Sony recently, and with the others that we have seen them release like full-on press releases to announce these changes. And so for them to not give that same level of communication and transparency into this move from Shawn Layden, like, really stoked up some speculation as to what's going on internally at Sony. Because again, it's not just Shawn Layden. We've seen Jim Ryan bounce around between a few different roles. We also saw, and I'm sorry, this article is so dense here. SIE Japan Asia President and SIE Japan Director Atsushi Morita has departed his roles effective immediately, according to a tweet from the Wall Street Journal's Takashi Mochizuki, which I believe that happened 2 days ago as well. And so we're seeing people shuffling around, moving into these different roles, and it's not unusual for people in these executive roles to want to move on to another project, or in like Shawn Layden's instance, or in Shawn Layden's situation, I'm sure that he can just retire pretty comfortably after 30 years of heading Sony and being an executive there for a considerable amount of time. He was moved to the VP of Sony Computer Entertainment Europe in the 90s. So he's been operating at like a C-suite level for the better part of 20 years, or probably close to his full 30 years there. So yeah, it's not unusual to see shakeups like this happen from time to time. But if you read the GameDaily.biz article, it talks about there being some kind of inner power struggles. I don't want to call it turmoil, because I don't want to misrepresent exactly how these relationships are working and how things are falling apart. But they talk about there being some power struggles within the structure, and that Jim Ryan is kind of peddling a vision that may have been different from Shawn Layden's, which may have been different from others within the company, and that there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of clarity in moving into the PlayStation 5 generation, which I think is what makes this story really, really interesting, is that these things are happening at one of the most volatile times in a console maker's lifetime, which is going from one generation to another. So let's get to some of the more interesting parts here. About halfway through the article, Cullen reports, as the perceived power struggle between Ryan and Layden comes to a head, it's starting to affect the upcoming next-gen transition. An employee at a major third-party publisher with direct knowledge of the situation has told Game Daily the confusion resulting from the global reorganization has made the switch, already difficult as is, even more concerning. Speaking under the condition of anonymity, Game Daily's source relayed what their company is facing. Quote, "This is the least amount of clarity we've ever had on a new console this close to transition," end quote, the source said. Quote, "I believe that the global restructuring is exponentially exacerbating the already difficult process of transitioning to a new generation, and now we're getting nervous. Read, very nervous," end quote. The third-party nervousness around the PS5's imminent launch isn't directly attributable to either leader, but there has been a fair amount of internal secrecy so that data and information isn't leaked before launch. Internal teams are slow to receive word about the new console, which means that third-party developers and publishers are being kept in the dark far more than in past cycles. And so if I understand this correctly, and if you're watching on stream or watching over on YouTube, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, the specs of a next generation console are decided on quite a ways before the actual architecture and design of the next gen console are decided upon. So they can communicate to these third parties who are outside of their, umbrella of control. They can say, hey, for the PS5, we're looking at using something comparable to this graphics card, comparable to this processor, able to handle up to this much this. Like here are the speculations to start designing your games within, although we have not completely settled on the architecture for those games. And so there's already a level of secrecy that goes on within developing these games, because the more people that know, the more opportunities there are to leak, and there's been speculation about and I'm not sure if this has ever been attributed to Sony, but I've seen it in other situations like this, where a company will kind of spread out multiple messages of possible specs or possible final design choices to see what comes out, so that they know where the leaks are coming from. So there's a lot of care that is taken with what's to come, and that's for a multitude of reasons. And I think the first reason is a competitive and strategic one, where, hey, Sony doesn't want the specs of their stuff releasing before Xbox has the chance to finalize the specs on theirs, because then Xbox could make a change and try to produce something more powerful at a cheaper cost. So there's that level of it, and then there's also the level of while we can see specs and assume things about the power of a console, I think there are many other things that go into what makes a console experience, and we're talking about features, we're talking about UI, we're talking about services that are available. And so if you let your specs leak far in advance of when the console is going to come out, it's going to drive a level of speculation among fan bases that I think can get wildly out of control. So the secrecy is externally is pretty understandable, However, if that secrecy or this communication is happening internally at the highest levels as well, where they're like, well, maybe we know that some people are on the way out, and maybe we know that there aren't going to be people who are here moving into the next generation, or or even we know that there are people here that are likely going to be moving on to a competitor soon, then they may start to tighten up on that secrecy even more internally. And when you have that, and you've got all these connection points from worldwide third-party studios trying to get information, knowing who to go to, knowing who to speak with, I think is really difficult. And maybe it isn't just like leaving people in the dark because they may be moving on, but just if you read through this article and you see like, okay, Jim Ryan was over this region's games, and then he got moved to this region, and then he got moved to this, and that is a point of contact for somebody, you know, outside of the industry. And so if they've got a new point of contact, even something as simple as that can cause a lot of confusion. I work in a client-driven industry and marketing. I have about 20 clients that I represent, and you know, in times where you're transitioning who's managing an account, and you know, the client, you're trying to alleviate the confusion with the client of like, okay, well, do I reach out to you still, or like, what if I have questions about something that the previous marketing manager delivered? Like, even at the small level that I work in, at a company of 30, where I can just like proverbially shout across the hall to somebody, there's confusion. So I can only imagine, like, when you start moving around these high-level executives who are likely connecting with high-level executives at other publishers and other studios, when that shuffling starts to happen and, oh, well, that's not my area of responsibility anymore, there's a ton of confusion there as well. There's also some talk in this article, discussion in this article about some ideological and strategic differences between Shawn Layden and Jim Ryan. For instance, Jim Ryan, you'll remember this from the Fortnite debacle, was just vehemently against crossplay, whereas Shawn Layden was more open to, we think that this is something that we need to start implementing. Ultimately, the crossplay stuff won out as it's been taken out of beta and opened up to all devs as of this week. And then also with cloud-based gaming as well, where Jim Ryan sees a real big he sees the future in cloud-based gaming, whereas Shawn Layden wasn't as sold as Jim Ryan was on that. And I think as we move forward, not so much the crossplay thing, because I think we're kind of past that conversation at this point, but as we move on, I think there needs to be a ton of alignment in Sony's approach and Microsoft's approach and Nintendo's approach to cloud-based gaming, because we're going to see it grow. We're going to see these services continue to grow and expand. And if there's not alignment there, it's hard to bring alignment with the third parties that you're trying to work with as well. So I don't want to go ringing any alarm bells, because I honestly think that these companies are structured in such a way that they can weather these storms. The only thing that gives me a little pause is the lack of clarity with the external communication here. But I don't think the world's on fire by any means moving into the PlayStation 5 generation. I just think it's an interesting look at a company who, for all intents and purposes, is really, really kind of secretive about the way that they operate. And so to have the veil pulled back just a little bit in order to see into this and see that, okay, well, maybe not everything is hunky-dory, but when you get leaders in a spot and at a time as pivotal as transitioning console generations, you're gonna get disagreements. You're gonna get differing opinions on the direction that you need to go, but it's about the ability to settle on a direction and move in that direction. And I don't know why Shawn Layden left. The handling of it from Sony and the communication of it from Sony has me speculating that it was likely due to some vision differences with other executives that just weren't going to be able to be resolved, and that stuff happens. And so he moves on. But I think that a move like that, as cutthroat as it may appear, sometimes is the best for a company to make when it's just, okay, well, we're moving into a direction, into a future where we need to know that everybody here is on board with where we're going. But just kind of the brevity of the announcement, the kind of lackluster rollout of it with no press release, that's simply my speculation on it. But don't go like freaking out thinking that, oh shit, the world's on fire, PlayStation 5 is going to be terrible because there's all this internal struggle from within. Like, these things happen all the time. Maybe not in this kind of a spot, but some others may see it and say, well, that's just a really natural spot for a guy to want to move on. He's, accomplished what he's wanted to accomplish. He's made PlayStation 4 a overwhelming success. He's led the direction of, a great stable of studios. And so just naturally stepping away at the end, I don't think is outside of the realm of possibility either. So we'll see how it shakes out. Hopefully Sony can get it together in terms of communicating with these other studios. And it's just one studio too, one studio who likely has one point of contact within Sony, or a team of people who he contacts within Sony. So it may not even be representative of the entire situation.